Welcome to this installment of Data Science Simplified. I am Dr. Mechi Kengla. I am the founder and chief data strategist of Data Product. Today, we have the pleasure of talking to Dr. Troy Hernandez about new technologies and best practices to enable data scientists. Welcome, Troy.
Thank you, Michi. It's good to see you.
Yes. So for folks listening, Troy Hernandez is a 39-year-old father, data scientist, activist, newly elected chairman of the Cook County Green Party. Wow. He earned his PhD in statistics from UIC in 2013. He lives in the Pilsen neighborhood of Chicago and works for IBM. He volunteers for the Pilsen Environmental Rights and Reform Organization, PERO. He served 2 years, a 2-year term as a community representative on the Pilsen Community Academy Local School Council. He's also an organizer for the Chicago R User Group. Wow, Troy, you're Superman. You're all over doing everything. Welcome. Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, I keep myself busy. It's good to be busy. Work is a blessing.
That's indeed true. Yes. So today we're going to talk a little bit about new technologies and best practices to enable data scientists. Why don't you tell me an overall scope when you think about new technologies and best practices? What comes to mind? What are the key tenets that as a data scientist or manager of data scientists you should be thinking about?
So, I guess two things I'm thinking about are GitOps, and it's the practice of having your code base in Git and running it off of what's in Git. So what is in your Git repository serves as the source of truth. So if I walk out the door and get hit by a snowplow, it's a big snowy day today in Chicago, then then the company or the project keeps going because everything is in there. Maybe not as quickly as before. So that's one thing. And the other sort of idea I've been seeing is communication. There's like a million blog posts about the importance of communication, and then you have the variety of blog posts about the importance of communication in data science. And I think in the age of people being deplatformed and being a political guy myself, you don't want to rely on Facebook or Twitter. And I think there's no stronger sort of, when I have young professionals or grad students come asking me for advice on how to get their career started, I just always say, get a website. Get a website, do a project, post your project there. And it shows people that not only can you do the work, but you can communicate that work. I just looked up this old phrase, if it's not on the web, it doesn't exist. And I had to do some digging on the internet to find where that actually came from. And it's from like 1998, some physics database where they were like, man, we don't even go to the library anymore. If it's not on a database, it doesn't exist.
Right.
And so that's the other sort of thread that I've been pulling on. The GitOps stuff comes from my work at IBM, OpenShift, Kubernetes,
Right.
Infrastructure as code sort of ideas that are somewhat new to me. I mean, I've used, Git. I'm not great with Git, but I'm functional with my Git. But the whole infrastructure as code thing with Kubernetes, it makes a lot of sense after digging into it for some time. So, and then comes in the sort of third angle with my volunteer work with PERO. So the Pilsen Environmental Rights and Reform Organization, we're trying to redo our website. We got this tech grant to get like a Zoom subscription, it's the pandemic and everything.
Right.
So we're like, we want to redo the website. And as a programmer, I want to use these ideas of reproducibility and Git and GitHub. And so we hired a web dev from the neighborhood to help rewrite this stuff because not everybody in the organization is a tech guy. So we wanted to get something in between, and we started talking about this thing called the Jamstack. which is Java. It stands for JavaScript, APIs, and markup.
Okay.
And it seems to be the way web devs are sort of migrating, and there's some good benefits to the Jamstack that I could go into if you'd like. That it makes it more scalable, makes it reproducible. There's no vendor lock-in, so if AWS doesn't like your website, you can go find whoever, some internet host, CMS they're called, content management system, that your website will be hosted around the world, and quick upload times when people go to your website. You don't want to wait for 15 seconds while your website loads, so you hire somebody to do that. And so it has all these nice benefits. You essentially decouple the front end stuff. You make it a static website, and then you have all the back end stuff as API. It's a microservice architecture, which again gets into this Kubernetes stuff. So it's kind of a winding road that I've taken, and now, so the Markdown has had, within data science, has had since 2014 our Markdown, and to get into the Python R holy wars of data science, which I think both tools should be used. This is one of those areas where our community has been way ahead. Our Markdown debuted in 2014, I believe. At least that's when it popped up on GitHub, and then shortly thereafter, there's Blogdown, which is what I started using this last year to publish my website. I published a blog post about GitOps with R, and it's basically, you can use R Markdown. If your users don't know what R Markdown is, it's Markdown, which is the sort of markup script that you use if you're writing comments on Slack or on Reddit. I've been a Redditor for 15 years, so I've been using Markdown for a while. It's actually created by Aaron Schwartz, the one of the founders of Reddit. And so it was a really easy transition for me. So it's an implementation of Donald Knuth, or Knuth. I don't know if the K is silent. He has this idea of literate programming. So you have your narrative here, and then you have a code chunk, and then you have a narrative explaining that, and then another code chunk, and maybe a visualization, and then you knit it all together, and it's this nice reproducible piece of code, and very readable HTML or PDF it outputs when it compiles, and it's just a fantastic way to communicate. And this is one of these areas where R has been ahead of the Python folks. There's similar Python tools, but I don't think they kind of went down this dead end path of Jupyter notebooks, which I can't stand Jupyter notebooks, but that's, it's I think the community is moving away from them and moving more towards a Markdown approach as well.
Yeah. So what I'm getting from you then is, whenever you're thinking about this best practice for tools to enable data science, data scientists, there are really three core things or tenets that drive any tool, right? Basically around enabling data science work. You mentioned communication, which is really critical. No one can argue that, right? About portability, the idea to basically be using containers or microservices to move and shuffle code, and reproducibility. I cannot speak. Reproducibility, the idea that someone can reproduce the work or the results that you just did. Now, there's a really strong key initiatives that should really be the core of any sort of project that anyone's working on, whether it's you're a data scientist or not, really, right, in the science space. But why GitOps and Jamstack in particular? I know you mentioned some of the advantages of that. How would you compare them versus, say, other tools that sort of support the work in the same way?
Well, so let me say that I pull in the Jamstack piece because it has those components of you can it's reproducible. It's kind of an implementation of the GitOps because your whole website is now just files and folders in a Git repo. It's portable, so when you're in so for my personal blog post, this whole Jamstack idea is put forward by this Netlify company that basically has webhooks. You can put webhooks into your Git repo, and whenever you make a change there, that'll set off. It'll rebuild the container. It looks like is what's happening in the back, and redeploy your website. Well, if you're in an enterprise, and I work with giant companies with IBM, and so like they're not deploying anything to Netlify. They're moving everything to Kubernetes for the scalability and all that. But it's the same thing. So if you ever do a Kubernetes demo, the first thing is deploy a static site to Kubernetes. And so it's just an HTML that says like, yay, hello Kubernetes world. But it's that same sort of approach. And that's not very exciting. If you're deploying a static site, you probably don't need Kubernetes. But if you're training deep learning models overnight, I believe it's DeepMind in the UK. Mm-hmm. They've been running Kubernetes for years, and they have some really interesting blog posts about that. So that's where you start to get that scale. And again, you can go from being a grad student with your website on GitHub to, okay, now I can take those same tools and work seamlessly in an enterprise and keep doing the same things I've always been doing. And I've noticed, in this sort of Python R holy war that R seems to be losing the PR, I always hear these like the semi-informed ideas of like R is not scalable, like R doesn't have memory, R has memory issues, and you're like, that's not true. Like they both, Python and R, if you're doing real data science, they're really just calling C++ in the background. They're just calling Fortran in the background. And Python holds the same thing in memory, just the same as R. And what's the other ones that I hear? It's usually this memory argument. It's not production, so there's a really nice website out there, like put R into production. And of course, being the Chicago R user group, we have a lot of finance guys here who've been using R to trade like billions of dollars a day on the stock market. And you're like, dude, is your production running $1 billion trades a day? I don't think so.
Well, let me preface. Let me jump into that argument. I know it's a little bit taken away from the topic, but it's very fascinating. And I'll confess, I'm a Python person. I've always been a Python person. I have worked with R, but I am a Python person. And now, I'm not saying that R is bad. What I'm saying is when I started working with Python, the state, and now this is over 10, 12, 15 years ago, comparing Python to R, there was no comparison. Python won in terms of deployment at that time. R has had a huge change, right? The way R works right now is quite different from the way it was back in 2008, for example.
I would say it depends if you do the tidyverse or if you do the tinyverse. So the tidyverse, I'm a big fan of RStudio, the IDE, and big fan of our Markdown, which RStudio does. They also do the tidyverse, which I'm not a huge fan of. Like I learned, like you did, I learned how to program in Python and R 15 years ago. And, I learned it initially on Python, but just as a statistician, I think more functionally. And I think R is more of a functional programming language where Python is more object oriented. It's just not how my brain works when I'm doing data science. So we don't have to go down that rabbit hole. I think they're both great tools. If you want to do deep learning, you should probably use Python. If you want to do a hardcore statistical analysis, you should probably use R. And again, with I think the point is moot when you start working with microservices. It doesn't matter what you program in. It's just an API.
That's right.
Like, I don't. Why does it matter if my API is got R in the background or Python in the background? I don't. We agree on what like the handshake is going to be, and then like it's the end of the day. So it's the end of the conversation. So the point being that this sort of PR war, it's the PR. I don't say war. PR matters, and so our Markdown has been around for 7 years, and Blogdown, which is what I now use. I migrated my website from WordPress to Blogdown, which is basically it's sort of a Jamstack implementation of our Markdown. So you write everything in our Markdown that compiles to Markdown, and then that compiles to HTML via some static site generator like Hugo or Jekyll. These names might sound familiar if you're not like a web dev, and if you are, you probably use them. And so and then that gets deployed via some container, Netlify. There's other companies that do that now. And our studio folks and just our people in general have been using our Markdown, like I said, for 7 years. They've been using Blogdown for, I think, 5 or 6 years shortly thereafter. And it just nobody's really put it together that like, okay, let's assume the web devs know best how to communicate with the world. That's their job, is to make websites. So we should it's just a short little PR move to say the RAM stack. So our APIs, and in this case, that's Shiny apps that you can deploy, again, to Kubernetes or to Shiny has, our studio has a Shiny button. You just push publish. So that's your API, or you can have a Plumber API or whatever APIs you want, and then not markup, but Markdown. Markdown's pretty much won the markup war in data science. So our APIs and Markdown, and you too can have all these best practices. And it's just sitting there waiting to be branded. And I've done little to no work at all other than connect these two sort of threads and embrace the branding.
Right. So I'll bring you back to one key tenet in terms of what we're talking about here. We're focused on web applications, right? Now, so this is particularly for web applications. What about you're working on models that are not necessarily something that you want to publish, something that are not web applications?
Well, so I open up a Git repo and I'm working in our studio. So this is another thing where I kind of have been angry at Jupyter Notebooks for a while because, I'm almost 40. My keyboard shortcuts are Control-C, Control-V.
Right.
I got a flow.
Yes.
IBM made me use a Mac for like the first year I was there. And like the whole Command-C, Command-V, I just couldn't do it. I'm like, give me a Linux laptop now. Right. I can't do this anymore. And it just takes me out of the flow. And I find it's the same thing with staying in an IDE. And I'm glad that the Jupyter Lab folks have kind of finally come along and been like, yes, an IDE is nice. And Markdown is nice because your keyboard shortcuts work the same. Control-1 takes me to edit the script. Control-2 takes me to the terminal. And so it just makes you move more quickly. So the move from working on our Markdown website to working on just a pure project that's of course, it's still in Git, and I'm just writing a .r script or a .python script, .py script. It's the same sort of flow. But again, so I do all that coding and I make, say, a package, right? It just allows me to stay in that same flow. And then, of course, I can transition to a different project and talk about that. So I just did that with this tiny Spotify R package that I put out, which is there's a Spotify API. I'm a big music fan, and somebody wrote an R wrapper for it.
Okay.
And of course, it was written with the tidyverse, and they had some breaking changes, and it had, I think, 12 or 14 dependencies for packages. So if one of those packages break, then Spotify R breaks. And this is sort of the idea of the tinyverse, which is like you want to minimize or take on dependencies with great caution, because something breaks upstream, your package is now broken. So I can't make my awesome customized playlists without this package working when I go to update, or do a fresh install on a computer, right? And so I rewrote it using these tinyverse principles, which is just to say, like, you're using these dozen packages from the tidyverse to literally just drop in replacement for base R functions, grepl, and what was the other one? Oh, paste. So there's just tidyverse drop-ins, and I was able, added some functionality, lost some functionality, but reproduced most of the package just by replacing these two things. Now I'm down to two dependencies. So that's a different repo. That's a different project. I did that, and then I went back to my website repo and wrote off about it and just called library tiny Spotify R, and was able to sort of write out the code very easily, and it compiles and it makes my daily playlist every day. So that's sort of my workflow.
Okay. That makes sense. So if you want to find out more information around best practices for data scientists, or more around GitHub's Jamstack and Ramstack, you can visit,
Ramstack.
That's right. You can visit Troy's website, his blog page. Troy, you want to put that up so people can take a look at it?
Oh yeah. Let me see. Share my website here with you. So there it is. So yeah, you can, it's got the little about me section, which you read already, but here's my blog. Got all these blog posts. This is the latest one, of course. The GitOps, they talk about a lot of these things with GitOps, but you see it's fairly responsive. Looks modern. It's got if you want to visit my Twitter, my Facebook, my YouTube channel, my LinkedIn, GitHub, my Cook County Green Party websites. It's all there. And I highly recommend deploying your websites with Markdown, utilizing the Ramstack principle.
Fantastic. So folks, there you have it. You know how to get in contact with Troy. You can follow him on all the social media links on his website. We're going to have a posting of his blog page down below, so you can actually click on it and follow through. Well, thank you for visiting with us today, Troy. We enjoyed having you talk about productivity as data scientists working.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Michi. It's always a pleasure.
For more data science insights and future installments of Data Science Simplified, just smash your subscribe button, and you can follow us on our social medias, Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Well, see you next time, and bye-bye.